Before we dive into today's journey, have you ever experienced something strange while out camping? Share your story in the comments below, and let's build this haven of eerie campfire tales together. Before we start the story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories. I needed this escape after the year I'd had. Peace was the only thing I craved. My ex-wife had taken the house, my boss had taken my sanity, and I was left holding nothing but a bag of resentment and a camera. So here I was, finally alone in Black Rock Canyon, Joshua Tree's hauntingly beautiful desert. They said these nights were the darkest in the country, perfect for the long exposure shots I needed for my portfolio, but also, hopefully, for some much-needed clarity. The sky was ink black, scattered with stars, and my RV felt like a fragile shell in this immense desert stretching out infinitely on all sides. I set up my tripod, thinking how strange it was to have so much space and yet feel the weight of something closing in, pressing down on me from every angle. I framed the shot. The jagged rock formations against the horizon looked like bones clawing up from beneath the desert. Just as I clicked the shutter, something caught my eye. Up on a nearby ridge, a pile of stones stacked into a rough tower stood silhouetted against the fading light. I squinted, unease prickling the back of my neck. It wasn't a cairn, at least not like the ones I'd seen before. These rocks were stacked too high and too precisely, almost ritualistic in their placement, yet I hadn't seen a soul here for miles. I shook it off and went back to shooting. The night, with all its dark vastness, was settling in, and I was ready to forget everything. That's when I heard it. A low, humming sound reverberating through the thin air. It was faint, just a vibration, but I felt it in my bones. I stood still, straining my ears as it grew louder, rhythmic, almost like a chant. I whipped around, expecting to find some desert animal or another hiker, but there was nothing. Just the stacked stones on the ridge, now looming in the moonlight, their shadows long and spindly like fingers stretching down toward me. "All right," I muttered, forcing a laugh. "Maybe you're just getting a little too comfortable out here." I forced myself back into the RV, telling myself it was just the wind, a desert echo, a trick of the open space. But that hum stuck with me, burrowing into my chest like a thorn I couldn't shake. I didn't think much more of it until the middle of the night when I was jolted awake by a noise inside the RV, a clicking, snapping sound. My heart pounded as I sat up, listening. Nothing. I climbed out of bed and checked the windows. That's when I noticed my camera's light blinking. I picked it up and froze. The photos, they'd been taken while I was sleeping. Distorted, blurry images of me lying in bed, the RV's dim interior barely lit. "What the?" I muttered, flipping through them. There was no way I had taken these. The only other option was that someone had been in here while I was asleep. My pulse raced as I checked the door. Locked. I told myself the camera must have malfunctioned. A faulty shutter, maybe. But in every photo, just beyond the frame, there was a shadow. A faint blur, like someone was standing just out of sight. I glanced out the window, half expecting to see someone staring back at me. But there was nothing, just the empty desert. Reluctantly, I climbed back into bed, but sleep was impossible. Every creak of the RV felt amplified in the silence. I lay awake until the first light of dawn finally broke the tension. In the harsh light of morning, my nerves felt foolish. Determined to shake the feeling, I threw on my gear and hiked up to the ridge where I'd seen the stacked stones. The desert had that strange, quiet hum again, as if it were alive and breathing. The closer I got, the more stones I saw, scattered across the sand, piled high, some forming a rough circle. At the center, I found something I hadn't expected. A rusted metal plaque, half buried in the dirt, worn down but still legible. I brushed off the sand and read aloud, "Do not disturb the desert's watchful ones." A chill ran through me. I'd heard enough stories to know some things were better left alone. I made my way back to the RV, but the feeling of being watched clung to me. I was only a few feet from the door when I saw it, someone standing at the edge of the rocks, staring down at me. My heart skipped. "Hello?" I called out. No answer. They just stood there, perfectly still, a tall figure with shadowed features. I blinked and they were gone. That night, I set up my camera again, trying to capture the stars, hoping to drown out the unease. But as the hours passed, the desert seemed to close in, and the silence grew almost deafening. Around midnight, the humming started again, that same low drone, like a chant. I shut my eyes, telling myself it was just the wind, but when I opened them, something shifted at the edge of my vision. There it was again, that shadowy figure. This time closer, standing just beyond the reach of my headlights. Its features were obscured, but it was unmistakably human. I couldn't see its face, but I felt its eyes, cold and unblinking. "Who are you?" I shouted. No response. It slowly lifted a hand, pointing toward the ridge and the circle of stones. My mind screamed to stay in the RV, to lock the doors, but something inside me pushed back, a bitter voice whispering that I was here to face my demons, even if they were made of nothing more than shadow and sand. I stepped out, heart pounding, and aimed my flashlight. Nothing. The figure was gone. But my camera, it kept snapping photos on its own. I checked the screen, flipping through the images. Each photo showed me standing in front of the RV. But behind me, there was someone. A figure. Grinning. Its face half-formed, almost human, but twisted, as if made from sand and shadow. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the piled stones. A cold rush brushed against my neck. A whisper, low and distorted. "Ethan." I snapped. I hurled the camera at the rocks, smashing it to pieces. I don't know why, but something told me that's what it wanted. The desert fell silent. I felt it let go. I drove all night, never looking back. Weeks later, I found a package in the mail. No return address, no note. Inside was a single photo. It was one of my last shots from Black Rock Canyon, me asleep in the RV. But in the corner, a shadow hovered over me, its hand reaching out. And on the back, 5 chilling words were scrawled, "You will come back someday." I always thought the vastness of the desert would calm me. It's what I needed after everything that had happened at work. The constant pressure, the unrelenting deadlines, the suffocating feeling of being boxed into the same routine. I planned the trip to Big Bend National Park months ago, thinking a week away from it all would clear my head. Solitude in the desert seemed like the perfect way to hit the reset button. I'd heard the stories, of course, rumors of spiritual significance, whispered legends passed down by native tribes, but I'd never put much stock in that kind of thing. They were just stories, right? I was wrong. Big Bend is a place where the land meets the sky in such a dramatic way that it's almost unnerving. The sun bakes the earth by day, and at night the stars stretch endlessly, a canopy of light over the barren landscape. The silence is deafening, and out here, far away from everything, it feels like the world is holding its breath. I arrived at the park late in the afternoon, the sun already beginning to dip behind the distant Chisos Mountains. My plan was simple: hike the trail to the window, a spot famous for its breathtaking sunset views. I'd set up camp, spend the night there, and continue deeper into the wilderness the next day. A week alone, away from the noise of civilization, I'd been craving this. Everything seemed perfect at first. The air was dry and warm, the trail rugged but manageable, and my gear was top-notch, a mix of high-end camping equipment and essentials I'd collected over the years. I felt prepared, confident, ready to let the desert cleanse my mind. But that feeling didn't last. By the time I reached my campsite, I noticed my GPS was flickering, the signal coming and going without explanation. I chalked it up to a glitch. Maybe the battery was low, though I had checked it before I left. Then my phone started to act strange. The battery, which had been at 80% when I arrived, drained rapidly, dropping to 20% in just a few minutes. No big deal, I thought. I wasn't here to use my phone. After all, this was supposed to be my escape from technology. As I set up my tent, the sun dipped below the horizon and the cold winds swept through the canyon. I hadn't expected the temperature to drop so quickly, and I fumbled through my pack for my jacket. My hands were shaking, and I wasn't sure if it was from the cold or something else. That's when I heard it, the first sign that something wasn't right. It was faint at first, just a whisper carried on the wind, so soft I thought I imagined it. But then it came again, rhythmic, almost like chanting, echoing through the canyon. I paused, holding my breath, straining to hear. There was nothing, just the sound of the wind. "Get it together, Tyler," I muttered to myself. I was overthinking things again, the wind through the rocks, that's all it was. My mind playing tricks on me, feeding into my anxieties like it always did. I finished setting up camp and tried to relax, but the uneasy feeling wouldn't leave me. The silence was oppressive, heavy, as if the desert itself was waiting for something. I tried to brush it off. I was just tired, exhausted, really. That night, as I lay in my tent, the whispers returned, louder this time, clearer. It wasn't the wind. It was something else, something real. The whispers grew, surrounding me, coming from every direction. They weren't in English, not even Spanish. It was an ancient language, guttural and rhythmic, like a chant I couldn't understand. I sat up in my sleeping bag, my heart racing. I reached for my flashlight, but when I clicked it on, the beam sputtered and died. My hands fumbled in the darkness, searching for my backup lantern. When I found it, I clicked it on, flooding the tent with light, but the whispers didn't stop. They only seemed to get closer. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it was just my imagination, but deep down I knew something was wrong. This wasn't just anxiety. Something was out there. I stepped outside. The cold air hit me like a slap to the face. The fire I'd built earlier had long since died down to embers. I looked around, scanning the landscape with my lantern. That's when I saw it. The small stone cairns, dozens of them, scattered around the edges of my campsite like tiny tombstones. They hadn't been there when I set up camp, I was sure of it. A chill ran down my spine. Someone had been here, or something. My mind raced. Could it have been other hikers? A prank, maybe? But the trail had been empty when I arrived, and this was an isolated spot. No one would have come this far just to mess with me. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. My hands were shaking as I backed toward my tent, the beam of my lantern swinging wildly across the ground. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a movement. A shadow, just at the edge of the light, darting between the rocks. It was too fast to be human. My heart pounded in my chest as I swung the lantern around, trying to catch another glimpse, but there was nothing, just the empty desert. I bolted back into my tent, zipping it shut behind me, as if that thin layer of nylon could protect me from whatever was out there. I sat there, gripping the lantern, listening to the whispers fade into the distance. I didn't sleep that night. Every noise made my heart jump. Every gust of wind felt like something moving just outside. By morning, the whispers were gone, but the unease lingered. I packed up camp, deciding to cut my trip short. I'd head back to the trailhead, call it a failure, and go home. There was no shame in that. But as I started hiking back, something was off. The trail didn't look right. The landmarks, the rock formations, they weren't where they should have been. I pulled out my map, trying to orient myself, but nothing matched. It was like the land itself had shifted overnight. I checked my GPS, but the screen was blank, dead. My phone, too, had lost all power. Panic set in. I was lost, completely, utterly lost in the middle of the desert. I forced myself to stay calm, to breathe. I could find my way back. I just retraced my steps. But no matter how far I walked, the landscape seemed to warp around me, twisting into unfamiliar shapes. My footprints, which should have been visible in the sand, were gone, erased, as if I'd never walked that way at all. The sun climbed higher in the sky, beating down on me, but the cold from the night before hadn't left. It clung to me, seeping into my bones. And then I saw it again. The shadow. It was farther away this time, just a dark figure standing on the ridge, watching me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It was tall, impossibly tall and thin. I couldn't make out any features, just its silhouette against the sky. It didn't move. It didn't come closer. It just stood there, watching. I didn't know what it was, but I knew I had to get away from it. I turned and ran, my legs burning as I scrambled over the rocks, my pack bouncing against my back. But no matter how far I ran, the figure was always there, always just at the edge of my vision, standing still, waiting. My mind raced with the legends I'd read before the trip, stories of La Malahora, the evil hour, a spirit that lured travelers to their doom. It was said to appear just before tragedy struck, a warning of death. I hadn't believed in those stories, not really, but now, with the shadow stalking me, I wasn't so sure. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the desert. I was exhausted, my body aching, my mind frayed. I couldn't keep running. I had to face it. I stopped, turning to look at the ridge behind me. The shadow was closer now, standing still, its dark form blending with the rocks. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "I'm not afraid," I said aloud, though my voice wavered. "I'm not afraid of you." The shadow didn't move, but I felt its presence, heavy and oppressive, weighing down on me. My heart raced, but I forced myself to stand my ground. Slowly, the figure began to fade, dissolving into the landscape like smoke. The whispers, too, faded into the wind, growing quieter until they were gone. I stood there for a long time, the desert silent once more. The sky darkened above me. I didn't know what had just happened, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't stay here any longer. The next morning, I found the trail. The landscape had returned to normal, the landmarks in the right places, as if nothing had changed. I made my way back to the trailhead, my legs weak, my mind still spinning from the encounter. I left Big Bend that day, never to return. Some people might say it was just my imagination, that the isolation and the anxiety had gotten to me. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. The desert is a place of mystery, a place where the veil between worlds is thin, and sometimes something crosses over. I came to Allegan National Forest to clear my head, to shut out the noise and rebuild myself. I'd had it all planned, a long weekend of solitude in the Pennsylvania wilderness, alone with my thoughts, and maybe enough bourbon to forget the mistakes I'd made back home. The kind of reset a guy sometimes needs after losing everything. Setting up camp went smoothly enough. My RV was nestled in a secluded pocket deep within the trees, and by sunset, I was settling in, trying to forget that it had only been a week since my divorce was finalized. If anyone had asked, I would have said I was here to embrace the solitude, to challenge myself. But if I'm honest, I came to avoid feeling like I'd been left behind. The forest around me was quiet, almost too quiet. No hum of civilization, no faint rumbles of cars, just an unsettling silence broken only by the occasional bird call or the rustling of branches. But I told myself that's what I wanted, peace. On the first day, I'd spent hours hiking through the old-growth trails, letting the stillness absorb my thoughts. I met only one person, a guy named Randy, who I ran into as I turned a corner on a narrow trail. He looked about my age, tall with a scruffy beard and a wide grin that said he was more than happy to have company. "Not many folks come out this far," he said, giving me a nod. "A guy like you coming out here solo, just getting away from things?" I shrugged, not interested in diving into my personal life, but Randy's gaze stayed fixed on me, curious. "Well," he continued, "just be careful around these parts. Ever heard of the Hollow Men?" "The what?" I asked, laughing. This guy was clearly setting me up for some campfire story. "Spirits of miners," Randy explained, looking serious. "Died in a cave in here back in the 1800s. They say they linger in these woods, hollow shells trying to lure folks to their doom. Even some of the locals won't come out here alone." He must have seen my skeptical look because he chuckled, adding, "Laugh all you want, man. Just don't go answering voices out there, all right?" I waved him off with a smirk, but his words stuck with me as I continued down the trail. The silence of the forest, once comforting, now felt watchful, like something was waiting just beyond the trees. That night, I sat by my RV staring up at the stars that looked almost unnatural in their brightness against the dark, empty sky. I poured myself a drink, willing myself to shake off Randy's ghost stories and just focus on the calm, on the stillness of the place. But the peace didn't come. Instead, there was a strange rhythmic sound echoing through the woods, like the distant tapping of metal against rock. It was faint, almost like an echo. My first thought was that it had to be some kind of old machinery, an oddity, but not impossible in a place like this. Still, it sent a chill through me, prickling the hairs on my arms. By the time I made it inside the RV, I was brushing off the noise as my imagination. But that's when I noticed something even stranger. My pocket knife was gone. It had been right there on the countertop where I'd left it after dinner, but now it was nowhere to be found. I checked my pockets, the table, even the floor, but it had vanished. I tried to shake off a growing sense of unease, telling myself I'd just misplaced it. But the feeling stayed with me, settling into my bones as I lay in bed that night, listening to the stillness around me. Just when I was on the verge of sleep, a quiet, subtle scratching sound echoed through the RV. My heart stopped as I lay frozen, straining to listen. Nothing. It was only the wind, I told myself. But that night, my dreams were filled with shadows shifting in the trees, voices whispering my name. The next day was more of the same. I explored deeper into the forest, and the unsettling feeling only grew stronger. I started hearing faint whispers just outside my line of sight, always when I was least expecting it. They were soft and quick, like a conversation I wasn't meant to hear or someone calling out, trying to get my attention. When I stopped to listen, though, they were gone. The worst was the fog. Sometime after midday, a strange, heavy fog rolled in, blanketing the forest in a dense, gray haze. It felt like something out of a horror movie, obscuring the trails, making even familiar paths seem foreign and confusing. I tried to find my way back to camp, but every trail looked the same, winding in endless loops. By the time I finally stumbled into my campsite, I felt more disoriented than ever, as if I'd somehow crossed a boundary into a different world. That night, I heard it again. The rhythmic banging, louder this time, like the echoes of old mining tools. I sat in the RV, clutching a flashlight, the noise reverberating through my mind until I couldn't stand it anymore. I had to know what was making that sound. The forest was alive in a way I'd never experienced before. Each shadow, each twist of a branch seeming to watch me, follow me. The sound led me deeper into the woods, my flashlight beam barely cutting through the thick fog that seemed to grow denser with every step. And then I saw them. Figures, barely visible through the haze. They were human shapes, no doubt about it, but hollow, like shadows cast against a wall. They moved in slow, shuffling steps. As I got closer, I realized they weren't walking, they were mining. Hands held picks that struck the ground rhythmically, echoing through the trees. "Hey!" I called out before I could think twice. Every head snapped up at once, a dozen hollow eyes turning toward me, empty and lifeless. My breath caught in my throat as I realized these weren't people. They weren't anything close to people. I stumbled backward, heart racing. The figures closed in as I turned to run. I heard a voice calling my name. Logan. Logan. It was Randy's voice, coming from somewhere beyond the shadows. I felt an instinctive pull, a need to answer him, to follow the voice. But I couldn't shake the memory of his warning. Don't go answering voices out there. I kept running, the voice following me, calling, pleading, until I was back at the RV. I slammed the door behind me, locking it, my breath coming in gasps as I stared out into the darkness. The hollow men lingered at the edge of the clearing, their eyes fixed on me, watching, waiting. I sat in the RV, every nerve on edge, wondering if they'd try to get inside. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the soft scrape of fingers or claws against the outside walls. Taking a deep breath, I forced myself to stop, to not resist, to not fight. I closed my eyes, hoping the hollow men would lose interest. Minutes ticked by agonizingly slow. Gradually, the sounds faded until finally, there was silence. I opened my eyes. The figures were gone. I started the RV and floored it, heart pounding as I sped away. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station outside Allegan, hands still shaking. I wasn't sure what I'd seen, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going back. I parked my RV deep in the Black Hills, farther than I'd ever dared to go before. The last sign of civilization had been a gas station over an hour back, and now it was just me, the trees, and the silence. And that was exactly what I wanted. Solitude. After the divorce, I craved it like a drug. I needed this trip to remind myself of who I used to be, before the arguments, before the failures, before the loneliness settled in like a slow-burning rod. Out here, surrounded by miles of forest, I'd find peace. At least that's what I told myself as I killed the engine, the sudden quiet swallowing me whole. I climbed out of the RV and stretched, breathing in the sharp, cold air. The Black Hills were breathtaking, tall, ancient pines rising like sentinels against the darkening sky. The wind was still, not even a rustle of leaves. Just silence. I walked around the clearing, feeling the weight of the world lift ever so slightly with each step. This was why I loved the wilderness, the isolation, the escape. But there was something off this time, a heaviness in the air. I'd been here before, years ago, but it had never felt like this. I shook off the feeling. My mind was playing tricks on me. It had been a rough few months, and I wasn't thinking straight. A couple of nights out here would fix that. I busied myself with setting up camp, though I didn't have much to do. The RV had everything I needed. I lit a fire outside anyway, for old time's sake, and poured myself a drink. I sat on the fold-out chair and stared into the flames, letting the warmth pull me in. Then I heard it. A sound, faint at first, like tapping. I looked around, but there was nothing. Probably just the forest settling. I turned back to the fire, trying to relax, but the noise came again, rhythmic, deliberate this time. I couldn't shake it off. Animals, I muttered to myself, standing up and shining my flashlight into the trees. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the dense undergrowth. I scanned the edge of the forest, expecting to see a raccoon or a deer, but there was nothing. Just the trees, standing tall, unmoving. I took a deep breath and laughed. I was being paranoid. The first night alone always did this to me, made me jump at shadows. I headed back into the RV, locking the door behind me. That night I slept fitfully. Dreams of my ex-wife drifted through my mind, her face twisted in anger, her voice echoing in that same sharp, accusing tone I knew too well. I woke up several times, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. By morning, the feeling of unease still clung to me like a damp fog. I tried to ignore it, pushing myself to enjoy the day. I spent the morning hiking, trying to lose myself in the familiar sights of the Black Hills, but it was hard to shake the feeling that something was wrong. The woods felt off. Too quiet, too still. I returned to the RV just after midday, planning to settle in and enjoy a lazy afternoon. That's when the real problems began. The generator sputtered and died as I tried to start it up. I cursed, fiddling with the switch, but nothing happened. No power, no lights, and no heat. I wasn't worried yet. I could figure it out. I always did, but the frustration simmered beneath the surface. I was already on edge, and the last thing I needed was for the RV to start malfunctioning. I grabbed my toolkit and went outside, working on the generator for what felt like hours. As I crouched next to the RV, I thought I heard footsteps behind me. I froze, wrench in hand, listening. There it was again. Soft, slow steps, like someone was circling me. I whipped around, but the forest was empty. Just the same dense pines standing silent, watching. "Get it together, Jack," I muttered, turning back to the generator. By dusk, I was back inside. The generator was still dead and the RV was cold, but I told myself it was fine. I'd built a fire outside, so I didn't need heat in here. I sat by the fire again, staring out into the forest, hoping the flames would chase away the anxiety that had been building all day. That's when I saw them. Shadows, just at the edge of the firelight. They were tall, thin, humanoid, but wrong somehow. Too elongated, too stiff. They stood between the trees, unmoving, watching me. My breath caught in my throat as I blinked, thinking I was imagining things, but they didn't disappear. They were still there, standing in the shadows just beyond the fire. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice cracking. No response. The figures remained still, their hollow eyes fixed on me. I stood up slowly, grabbing the flashlight and shining it toward them, but the beam seemed to bounce off the darkness, unable to penetrate the trees. When I lowered the light, they were gone. I stumbled back into the RV, slamming the door behind me. My heart pounded in my chest as I paced the small space, my mind racing with possibilities. Had someone followed me out here? Were they messing with me? I grabbed my phone, only to find the battery drained, dead. The same with my watch. I was completely cut off. I tried to calm myself down, but the sense of dread was overwhelming. I felt like I was being watched, even inside the RV. I peeked out the window, expecting to see those figures again, but the clearing was empty. The fire outside was still burning, casting flickering shadows across the ground. I crawled into bed, wrapping myself in blankets to ward off the chill that had settled in. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, that I was jumping at shadows because of the divorce, because of the loneliness. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I barely slept that night, and when I did, my dreams were filled with strange voices, whispers that sounded like my ex-wife, but hollow, distorted. She called to me from the darkness, telling me to come outside, to follow her into the trees. When I woke, I was drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. It was morning, but the RV was still freezing. I could see my breath fogging in the air. I had to leave. Something was wrong here, and I wasn't going to stick around to find out what. I threw my things together, ready to get the hell out of the Black Hills. But when I tried the engine, the RV wouldn't start. No matter how many times I turned the key, it sputtered and died. I slammed my fists against the steering wheel, panic rising in my chest. I grabbed my bag and rushed outside, but as soon as I stepped into the clearing, I froze. They were back. The figures, Tall, hollow-eyed shadows stood at the tree line, surrounding the clearing. Dozens of them now, all watching me, waiting. I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. The fire had burned out during the night, and the clearing was shrouded in a thick, unnatural fog. I had to get out of here. The figures didn't move as I grabbed my camping knife and marched toward the nearest tree, determined to hack my way out of this nightmare. I had seen strange carvings on some of the trees, symbols jagged and twisted. Maybe they had something to do with this, something to do with the figures. With trembling hands, I drove the blade into the bark, carving through the strange lines. As soon as I broke the symbol, the air shifted. The shadows flickered, and for a moment I thought I heard a low echo and wail. I didn't stop. I hacked at the trees, cutting through every symbol I could find. The voices in my head grew louder with each slash. My ex-wife's voice, distorted and hollow, begged me to stop, telling me to come into the forest to let go, but I didn't listen. I couldn't. Finally, when I had cut through the last symbol, the air went still. The figures at the tree line melted away, dissolving into the fog. I stumbled back to the RV, my legs weak, my mind spinning. The engine roared to life on the first try. I sped out of the clearing, not daring to look back. The Black Hills vanished behind me, swallowed by the fog. But even now, as I write this, I can still feel them watching, waiting. The hollow ones never really let you go. I needed this escape after the year I'd had. Peace was the only thing I craved. My ex-wife had taken the house, my boss had taken my sanity, and I was left holding nothing but a bag of resentment and a camera. So, here I was, finally alone in Black Rock Canyon, Joshua Tree's hauntingly beautiful desert. They said these nights were the darkest in the country, perfect for the long exposure shots I needed for my portfolio, but also hopefully for some much-needed clarity. The sky was ink black, spattered with a smattering of stars, and my RV felt like a fragile shell in this immense desert, which stretched out infinitely on all sides. I set up my tripod, thinking how strange it was to have so much space and yet feel the weight of something closing in, pressing down on me from every angle. I framed the shot, the rock formations jagged against the horizon like bones clawing up from beneath the desert. Just as I clicked the shutter, something caught my eye, something odd up on a nearby ridge. A pile of stones stacked in a rough tower stood silhouetted against the fading light. I squinted, unease prickling the back of my neck. It wasn't a cairn, at least not like the ones I'd seen before. These rocks were stacked too high and too precisely, almost ritualistic in their placement. And yet I'd seen no one here, not a soul for miles. I shook it off and went back to shooting. The night, with all its dark expansiveness, was settling in, and I was ready to forget everything. That's when I heard it, a low humming sound reverberating through the thin air. It was faint, just a vibration, but I felt it in my bones. I stood still, listening, straining my ears as it grew louder, rhythmic, almost like a chant. I whipped around, expecting to find some desert animal or even another hiker, but there was nothing. Just the stacked stones up on the ridge, now looming in the moonlight, their shadows long and spindly like fingers stretching down toward me. "All right," I muttered, forcing a laugh. "Maybe you're just getting a little too comfortable out here." I forced myself back into the RV, telling myself it was just the wind, a desert echo, a trick of the open space. But that hum stuck with me, burrowing into my chest like a thorn I couldn't shake. I didn't think much more of it until the middle of the night when I was jolted awake by a noise inside the RV, a clicking, snapping sound. My heart hammered as I sat up, listening. Nothing. I climbed out of bed, checking the windows, and noticed my camera's light blinked. That's when I saw them, the pictures. They'd been taken while I was sleeping. Distorted, blurry images of me lying in bed, the RV's dim interior barely illuminated. What the? I muttered, flipping through them, my mind scrambling for an explanation. There was no way I'd taken these. The only other option was that someone had been in here while I was asleep. My pulse raced, and I checked the door, feeling a wave of relief to find it locked. I told myself the camera was just malfunctioning, a faulty shutter, maybe. But still, the hairs on my arms stood on end. In every photo, just beyond the frame, there was a shadow, a faint blur, like someone was standing just out of sight. I glanced out the window, half expecting to see someone staring back at me. But there was nothing, just the desert, empty and still. Reluctantly, I climbed back into bed, but sleep was out of the question. Every creak of the RV felt amplified in the silence, and I lay awake until the first light of dawn finally broke the tension. In the harsh light of morning, my nerves felt foolish. Determined to shake the feeling, I threw on my gear and hiked up to the ridge where I'd seen the stacked stones. The desert had that strange quiet hum again, as if it were alive and breathing. The closer I got, the more stones I saw. They were everywhere, scattered across the sand, piled high, some forming a rough circle. At the center, I found something I hadn't expected, a rusted metal plaque, half buried in the dirt, worn down, but legible. I brushed the sand off, reading the words aloud, feeling the weight of each one. Do not disturb the desert's watchful ones. I swallowed, feeling an odd chill run through me. I'd read enough stories, heard enough lore, to know that some things were better left alone. I made my way back to the RV, but that feeling of being watched clung to me. I was only a few feet from the door when I saw it. Someone standing at the edge of the rocks, staring down at me. My heart skipped. I called out, "Hello?" But there was no answer. They just stood there, perfectly still. A tall figure with shadowed features. I blinked and they were gone. That night, I set up my camera again, trying to capture the stars, hoping to drown out the unease and work. But as the hours passed, the desert seemed to close in around me, and the silence grew almost deafening. Around midnight, the humming started again. That same low drone, a chant. I shut my eyes, telling myself it was a desert sound, a trick of the wind. But when I opened my eyes, something shifted at the edge of my vision. There it was again, that shadowy figure. This time, closer, standing just beyond the reach of my headlights. Its features were obscured but unmistakably human. I couldn't see its face, but I felt its eyes on me, cold and unblinking. "Who are you?" I shouted. But it said nothing. It just stood there, silent, watching. I felt the chill seep into my bones as the figure slowly lifted a hand, pointing toward the ridge and the circle of stones. My mind screamed at me to stay in the RV, to lock the doors and wait for morning. But something inside me pushed back, a bitter voice whispering that I was here to face my demons, even if they were made of nothing more than shadow and sand. I stepped out of the RV, heart pounding, and aimed my flashlight toward the figure. But the light revealed nothing. The figure was gone. My camera kept snapping on its own, capturing photo after photo. I checked the screen, flipping through them with growing horror. The pictures showed me standing in front of the RV. But behind me, there was someone, a figure standing in the shadows, grinning. Its face half-formed, almost human but twisted, as if made from sand and shadows. I stumbled back, fighting the instinct to run, and nearly tripped over the piled stones near the ridge. My breath was ragged, and I felt something cold brush against my neck. A whisper, low and distorted, echoing in the emptiness. "Ethan," it hissed. I snapped. I hurled my camera toward the stones, smashing it on the rocks, hearing it shatter into pieces. I don't know why I did it, but something told me that's what it wanted. That whatever this thing was, it had fed off my memories, my photos, my presence. The desert was silent again. I felt it let go of me, the weight easing, and I staggered back to the RV, that trembling, feeling a strange sense of loss and relief. I drove all night, the desert a blur of shadows in my rearview mirror, refusing to look back. But as dawn broke, I felt a strange calm settle over me, a peace I hadn't felt in years. I didn't know what I'd seen, but I knew it was gone, left behind with the shattered pieces of my camera and whatever had haunted me for so long. Weeks later, I found a package in the mail. No return address, no note. Just a simple envelope. Inside was a single photo. It was one of my last shots from Black Rock Canyon, a photo of me asleep in the RV, peaceful, unaware. But in the corner of the image, a shadow hovered over me, its hand reaching out as if trying to pull something out of me. And there, scrawled across the back of the photo, were 5 chilling words: "You will come back someday." I should have known something was wrong the second I stepped out of the RV. The forest around me felt too still, the kind of stillness that makes you question whether the world itself is holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. But I brushed it off. I was in the middle of the Sawtooth National Forest, miles from any other campers or hikers. This was exactly what I wanted. Complete isolation. This place was going to make for the perfect series on my channel. Unmarked trails. I'd call it a deep dive into forgotten paths, places people were too afraid to explore. And this one, it had all the elements of a viral video. No one knew much about the unmarked trail I was hunting, only vague rumors of hikers disappearing and whispered stories of something called the Collector. Something about that name intrigued me. I wasn't one to believe in folklore or ghost stories, but my audience loved them, and that's what mattered. The first 2 days passed uneventfully. I hiked, filmed B-roll footage, and narrated into my camera about the history of the area. The trail I was following wasn't exactly easy to find. I had to rely on a few tips from locals, a vague map sketched by a guide at a general store, and a lot of guesswork. But I found it, an overgrown path cutting into the forest, almost hidden by the surrounding brush. Perfect. This is it, I said into the camera, feeling the excitement bubble up. The forgotten trail. I spent that afternoon hiking along it, deeper into the wilderness than I'd planned. Time got away from me, but the sun was still up, casting golden light through the canopy. I knew I had to head back to camp soon, but the trail kept pulling me further. I wanted more footage, more content for the channel. By the time I returned to my RV, dusk was settling in. I set my gear down, sat by the fire I'd built earlier, and reviewed the footage. That's when I noticed it. In the background of one of my shots, there was something. A figure standing just at the edge of the trees. It was faint, barely visible, but definitely there, a tall, shadowy outline, watching me. I rewound the clip and zoomed in, but when I played it back again, the figure was gone. Just trees. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I had been alone all day, hadn't I? It's nothing, I muttered to myself, shaking off the creeping unease. Probably a glitch in the camera, some kind of light distortion. I'd seen that before. But even as I tried to rationalize it, my eyes kept drifting back to the tree line, scanning for movement. Nothing. That night, I barely slept. Every little noise made me sit up in bed, ears straining, heart pounding. But the forest was quiet, just the occasional rustle of leaves. Still, that feeling, the gnawing sensation of being watched, clung to me, even as the fire burned down to embers outside. The next morning, I pushed my nerves aside and geared up again. Today was the day I was going to push deeper into the trail. I was determined to find something, anything, that could give my channel the edge I was looking for. I packed my camera, drone, and enough supplies to last until nightfall. As I set off, something felt different. The forest had taken on an oppressive quality. The air was heavier, the light dimmer. The trail seemed to have changed too. The trees were growing closer together, the undergrowth thicker. Landmarks I thought I'd passed before were suddenly missing, or maybe I'd misremembered them. Either way, I felt more disoriented than I'd like to admit. But I pressed on. Several hours into the hike, my camera started malfunctioning. The battery, fully charged that morning, drained rapidly. The drone refused to take off. When I checked the footage I'd shot, static filled the screen, blurring everything. My frustration grew, but I wasn't about to quit. Not yet. That's when I saw it again. Ahead, on the trail, the figure. It stood between two trees, far enough away that I couldn't make out any details, but close enough to feel its presence. Tall, impossibly tall, and still. My breath hitched as I fumbled for the camera, but by the time I raised it, the figure had vanished again. I stood frozen for a moment, my pulse racing. What the hell was that? I wasn't imagining things. There had been someone, or something out there, but there was no sign of anyone now. No footprints, no rustling leaves, just silence. I should have turned back then. I should have packed up and left. But something deeper than curiosity kept me going. It was pride, maybe ego, the need to prove to myself that I wasn't just a YouTuber chasing shadows. I was a professional. I knew these woods. I pressed on, my mind racing with thoughts of how this footage, real or not, could be my breakthrough. I could see the thumbnails, the titles, the cursed Collector Trail. Captured on film, it would go viral. Guaranteed. But as the hours dragged on, the trail seemed to twist and turn in ways that didn't make sense. I wasn't sure how far I'd gone anymore. The sun, which should have been high in the sky, seemed to hang low, casting long shadows earlier than it should have. And then I heard the whispers. At first they were faint, barely audible over the crunch of my boots on the dirt, but the deeper I went, the clearer they became. Voices, indistinct, like a conversation just out of earshot. I stopped, straining to listen. My heart thudded in my chest. Ryan. The voice was soft, almost gentle, but hearing my name sent a cold shiver down my spine. I spun around, scanning the forest, but there was no one. Just trees. And then, there it was again. The figure, closer this time. It stood in the shadows, tall and unmoving, its eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. I took a step back, my breath quickening. This wasn't possible. It couldn't be real. Ryan. The voice was clearer now, coming from the figure. My legs felt heavy, frozen in place as I stared, unable to look away. It didn't move, didn't approach. It just stood there, watching. I fumbled for my camera, hands shaking, but when I hit record, the screen flickered and went black. The battery was dead again, my phone too, completely drained, though it had been fully charged that morning. Panic surged through me. I turned and bolted down the trail, my feet pounding the dirt. But no matter how far I ran, the forest seemed to stretch on forever. The landscape twisted around me, trails splitting off in directions I hadn't seen before, paths looping back on themselves. I was trapped. I stopped to catch my breath, leaning against a tree, my head spinning. The whispers hadn't stopped. They circled around me now, growing louder, more insistent. Come deeper. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog of fear that clouded my mind. I wasn't going to let this happen. I'd survived worse. I just needed to think, to get my bearings. But then I saw it. My camp. The RV. I stumbled forward, relief flooding through me as I reached the clearing. But something was wrong. The RV looked different. Older, like it had been sitting there for years. Weathered and decaying. I backed away slowly, my mind racing. This wasn't possible. I'd only been gone a day, 2 at most. But the way the RV sagged, its windows cracked, and the rust that ate away at the metal, it felt like I'd been gone for much longer. Ryan? The voice was right behind me. I turned, and there it was. The collector. It stood at the edge of the clearing, its shadows stretching toward me, its eyes glowing brighter now, like embers in the dark. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Ryan, come with me. The collector's voice was a low whisper, soft and inviting, pulling at me, urging me to follow. It took a step forward, and I could feel its presence, heavy and cold, as though the very air around me had thickened. No, I choked out, my voice barely audible. The collector's eyes burned into me, its shadow growing longer, reaching out. I stumbled backward, finally breaking free of the paralysis that gripped me. Without thinking, I turned and ran. My legs burned as I sprinted into the trees, away from the RV, away from the trail. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees twisting and shifting as I ran. I didn't know where I was going, just that I had to get away. The whispers followed me, echoing in my ears, growing louder and louder until they became a roar. But I kept running, pushing through the exhaustion, the fear, the disorientation. I didn't stop until the first light of dawn broke through the trees, and when I finally did, I realized I had made it out. The forest was still behind me, the whispers gone, the collector nowhere in sight. I was alive, but I didn't feel relief, only emptiness. I left the Sawtooth National Forest that day, my RV abandoned where it had been claimed by the forest. I never posted the footage. There was nothing to show anyway, just static, shadows, and whispers. And sometimes, late at night, I can still hear the collector calling my name, waiting. If you'd told me a week ago that I'd be clutching my best friend's arm, hiding from a shadow creature in the Utah desert, I'd have laughed. That's the sort of stuff reserved for ghost stories told around the campfire, right? But now, as I crouch low in the sand, staring at the shadow shifting through the rocks like smoke, the chill in my spine tells me I was wrong. Tyler and I had been planning this trip for ages. It was supposed to be a break from our relentless lives back in San Francisco. When my promotion came through, I convinced him we had to celebrate by camping across the Southwest, ticking off bucket list spots along the way. Dead Horse Point was the prize, the place I'd looked forward to the most. Its isolation, haunting beauty, and honestly, its reputation for eerie legends that I couldn't resist. We pulled in late, just as the sun was setting over the canyon, casting a blood-red glow across the twisted rock formations. I remember that unease settled over me then, the kind that sends a tiny shiver from the back of your neck all the way down. Tyler, ever the skeptic, brushed it off as I pointed out that we were alone in this remote part of the park. "Great, more room for us," he joked, snapping photos of the stunning desert horizon. It took us a bit longer to find a spot than we'd planned. Our GPS was acting weird, leading us down dirt trails that seemed to spiral into nowhere. Eventually, Tyler managed to maneuver our RV into a flat area. Not ideal, but secluded and scenic. "Perfect," he said. I wasn't so sure. When we finally set up camp, the daylight had faded, leaving us bathed in the cold blue of twilight. I fiddled with our old portable radio, hoping to get some music to fill the silence, but the thing just crackled with static before sputtering and dying altogether. Tyler laughed, but I caught the way his eyes darted around the empty landscape. It felt almost oppressive, the way the land seemed to watch us. "You and that ghost-loving imagination," Tyler teased, rummaging through his bag. "Maybe it's a sign, or just Utah's finest weather." "Ha, very funny," I replied, forcing a laugh. "But this place has stories, Ty. Have you heard of the Skinwalker?" "The what?" He chuckled, turning to face me. "Me, are you seriously bringing up ghost stories?" "Not ghosts?" "Exactly," I said, trying to hide how uneasy I felt. "Skinwalkers are shapeshifters in Navajo legends. They can mimic people, even voices, to lure you away. People say they're evil spirits in human or animal form." Tyler looked at me with that familiar, infuriating smirk. "Oh yeah? Then let's summon one here. Skinwalker, Skinwalker, show yourself!" I hissed for him to stop, but he just laughed and returned to the viewfinder on his camera, snapping photos of the canyon now fully cloaked in darkness. I closed the RV door, hoping to shut out the chill that suddenly settled into my bones. But that shiver, that sense of being watched, it lingered. It was maybe an hour later when the first sound came. A light shuffling sound outside, like footsteps in the gravel. My heart skipped and I shot Tyler a look, but he was already putting on a brave face, pulling his boots on to investigate. "It's probably an animal," he whispered, winking. "Mountain lions, right?" "Yeah, because mountain lions sound like people," I said, my voice barely a breath. He ignored me, clicking on his flashlight and stepping out. It was quiet, eerily so. Tyler scanned the flashlight across the rocks. The beam cast long shadows. For a moment, I was almost convinced he was right, that we were just being paranoid in the strange silence of the desert, but then we heard it, a whisper. It was faint but unmistakable. "Mia." My breath caught in my throat. The voice was scratchy and low, calling my name. I whipped around to face Tyler, but he was frozen, his face drained of color as the voice echoed again. "Did you?" I stammered, trying to find the words. Tyler didn't answer. He just stared, flashlight clutched so tightly his knuckles were white. "Mia, Mia." This time, the voice seemed closer, as if it were slipping between the rocks, winding its way through the desert toward us. It sounded familiar too familiar, but wrong. "Let's go inside," I whispered. Tyler nodded, and we backed up slowly, not turning our backs on the emptiness around us. Once inside, I locked the door. Our breaths were rapid in the tight space. Tyler finally spoke, his voice shaking. "Tell me that was just the wind." "I don't think so," I replied, glancing out the window. The night was still, an unnatural stillness that seemed to hold its breath. Just as I was starting to feel a little less tense, there was a sharp knock on the side of the RV. We both froze. Another knock, then another, rhythmic, echoing through the metal walls. Tyler's face paled, and I could feel my heartbeat hammering in my throat. "Who's there?" he called, his voice wavering. The only answer was a slow scrape against the door, a sound that made my skin crawl. I squeezed Tyler's arm. "Don't open it." "What if someone's hurt?" he whispered back, already inching toward the door, but I couldn't shake the feeling that opening that door would be the worst thing we could do. "Just wait." Then, to our horror, we heard it. Tyler's voice calling from outside. "Tyler, help! Come out here." Tyler looked at me, eyes wide with terror. "What? How?" he stammered. The voice repeated, distorted, stretching his name into a twisted mockery. "Tyler, Tyler." I grabbed his hand, squeezing hard. "Don't answer. Whatever you do, don't answer it." The minutes dragged by, each second stretching into eternity as the voice continued calling, beckoning us. Tyler and I stayed as still as statues, clutching each other. The silence in the RV was thick and heavy. Finally, the knocking stopped, and for a moment, all was quiet. But just when I started to breathe again, the RV rocked violently, as though something massive had slammed into it. Tyler scrambled to the driver's seat, twisting the keys to start the engine, but it sputtered and died. He tried again and again, but nothing. The shape outside pressed itself against the window, casting an elongated, inhuman shadow. It had limbs too long, eyes that glowed with a sickly yellow light. Its mouth was twisted into an eerie mimicry of a smile that seemed to stretch too far. "Oh my God," Tyler gasped, clutching the steering wheel, white-knuckled. "Mia," the creature hissed, its voice a blend of my own and Tyler's, distorted, mocking. "Come outside." I shook my head, my voice trembling. "Don't look at it. Don't listen to it." But it was too late. Tyler couldn't tear his gaze away from that awful face in the window. His breath hitched as the creature's mouth stretched impossibly wide. Suddenly he screamed, clutching his ears as if to block out the sound. I pulled him away, whispering words I barely remembered from some article on Navajo blessings, words I didn't even know if I was pronouncing right. But as I spoke, the creature seemed to pause, tilting its head in confusion, almost weakened. Seizing my chance, I dragged Tyler out of his stupor, and together we stumbled out of the RV. The creature's eyes followed us, glowing like embers as we bolted toward a narrow crevice in the rocks. I held Tyler tight as we crouched in the shadows, watching the thing stalk around our RV, frustrated, snarling. It hissed again, a guttural sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Mia, you can't hide." Tyler's hand was clammy in mine, his breath shallow. "Mia, what is that thing?" "A skinwalker," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "It's feeding off our fear." Tyler squeezed my hand tighter. "What do? We stay quiet and don't look it in the eyes," I murmured, remembering the warning. "We wait." Time seemed to slow. The skinwalker circled the rocks, searching, stalking, its low growl echoing off the stone. At one point it stopped, sniffing the air, its gaze passing right over us, so close I could see the rotting skin around its eyes. We held our breaths, not daring to move. Slowly the creature slunk away, disappearing into the shadows. The silence stretched on, each second a lifetime. Eventually we crept back to the RV, praying the creature had gone. Tyler tried the engine again, and miraculously, it roared to life. Without a second thought, we sped down the road, the headlights cutting through the darkness as we left Dead Horse Point behind. By morning, we were back in Moab, dazed, exhausted, and shaken beyond belief. Tyler's arm was bleeding from where the creature had scratched him, and I had bruises from gripping him too tightly. We warned other campers, but no one believed us. Later, as I lay awake in the safety of a crowded campsite, I could still hear it, whispering my name on the wind, lingering in the corners of my mind. Maybe it was waiting, or maybe it was just saying goodbye until next time. I wasn't sure why I'd come back. Maybe it was the need for closure, a way to put everything behind me. It had been over a year since my wife Sarah passed away, and ever since I'd been drifting through life, avoiding people and dodging their well-meaning questions. When I was a park ranger, the forest had always been my sanctuary, and I thought maybe, just maybe, a trip back to the Cherokee National Forest would help clear my head. But as I parked my RV in a secluded spot deep in the forest, far away from the designated campsites, I couldn't shake the feeling that this trip was a mistake. The sun was setting, casting long shadows between the trees, and I watched the colors fade into darkness as I set up camp. The last time I'd been here was with Sarah, years ago, when life still made sense. Now it was just me, alone with my thoughts. I wanted the isolation. I needed the silence, or at least that's what I told myself. I sat by the fire, the crackle of the flames the only sound in the stillness of the forest. The night pressed in around me, thick and quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath. I stared into the fire, my mind drifting back to Sarah. I could almost hear her laugh, see her smile through the flickering flames. That's why I was here, to say goodbye, to finally let her go. I thought this place, our place, would help me find some peace. I was wrong. It started with a phone call. I turned my phone off the moment I arrived, didn't want any distractions, didn't need anyone bothering me. But as I sat there, staring into the flames, I heard it, the familiar sound of my phone ringing. I frowned, confused. I hadn't turned it back on. Slowly, I stood up and walked over to where I'd left it on the small table inside the RV. The screen was glowing, showing an unknown number. How was that possible? I had no signal out here, not this far from the nearest cell tower. Curiosity got the better of me. I answered the call. Hello? My voice was rougher than I expected, a little shaky at first. There was nothing but static, a low hum that buzzed in my ear. I was about to hang up when I heard it, a voice. Faint but unmistakable. Dan! I froze. My blood turned to ice. It was Sarah's voice. Dan, it's me! My heart pounded in my chest as I gripped the phone tighter, my mind racing to find some logical explanation. It had to be a prank, some sick joke. But the voice, it was hers. The way she said my name, that soft, familiar tone. Sarah, I whispered, barely able to get the word out. The static surged louder now, drowning out the voice. I called out again, but the line went dead. I stood there in the RV, staring at the phone in my hand, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. What the hell just happened? I checked the call log. Nothing. No record of the call. It was like it had never happened. I shook my head, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the mind. Grief does strange things to people. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe I just wanted to hear her voice again so badly that my mind had created it. But as I sat back down by the fire, the unease gnawed at me. Something felt wrong. The night wore on, and the fire died down to embers. I retreated into the RV, locking the door behind me. The quiet felt oppressive now, too heavy. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to forget the sound of her voice. Then the phone rang again. I bolted upright, my heart pounding in my ears. The screen glowed in the dark, the same unknown number flashing across it. I hesitated this time, but eventually answered. Dan. The voice was clearer now, more distinct. It was Sarah, no doubt about it. Come to me. The line crackled, and for a moment I swore I heard something else. A faint knocking sound, like someone tapping on the walls of the RV. I jumped out of bed and hurried to the window, peering out into the darkness. There was nothing, just the dense forest, silent and still. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to calm myself down. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to think rationally. There was no way Sarah could be calling me. She was gone. I knew that. I'd buried her. But the voice, it was so real. I didn't sleep much that night. Every creak, every whisper of wind against the RV had me on edge. By morning, I was exhausted, my nerves frayed. The next day, I tried to distract myself. I hiked some familiar trails, took in the beauty of the forest, and reminded myself why I loved this place. But the feeling of unease never left me. It lingered like a shadow, always just out of sight. That evening, as I sat by the fire again, my phone rang. I stared at it, dread pooling in my stomach. The same unknown number, the same impossible call. I let it ring, watching the screen until it finally stopped. I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking maybe it was over. But then the RV shook. It was subtle at first, just a faint tremor like something had bumped into it. I stood up, glancing around the campsite. No wind, no animals, nothing that could have caused it. Then I heard the knocking again. Soft, deliberate, like someone tapping on the side of the RV. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped outside, shining the beam into the trees. The light cut through the darkness, but there was no one there, just the empty forest, silent as ever. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. It had to be an animal, a deer maybe. But as I turned back to the RV, I saw it, a figure, just at the edge of the trees. It was too far to make out clearly, but it looked like a person. My heart skipped a beat. Hello? I called, my voice shaky. The figure didn't move. I took a step closer, squinting into the darkness. The figure stepped back, disappearing into the trees. I ran after it, the flashlight bouncing wildly in my hand. Wait. But when I reached the spot where the figure had been, there was nothing. No tracks. No signs that anyone had been there at all. Just me and the towering trees, their branches twisting overhead like skeletal hands. I turned back, my head spinning. This couldn't be real. It had to be the grief, the isolation messing with me. Maybe I'd finally lost it. As I walked back to the RV, my phone rang again. I didn't want to answer it, but I couldn't stop myself. I picked it up, my hand trembling. Dan, I'm here. Come to me. The voice was so clear now, so real. It sounded like Sarah was right there with me, just out of reach. I miss you, she whispered. Come find me. My chest tightened, tears stung my eyes. I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe she was still out there waiting for me, but I knew it wasn't her. It couldn't be. I slammed the phone down and ran into the RV, locking the door behind me. The knocking started again, louder this time, more insistent. Something wanted me to open that door. Something wanted me to follow. I sat there in the darkness, listening to the knocks, the whispers, my heart racing. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The following day, I packed up camp. Whatever was out there, I wasn't going to wait around to find out. I needed to leave now. But the forest had other plans. As I drove through the winding forest roads trying to make my way back to the main road, I realized something terrifying. I was lost. No matter which turn I took, I ended up back in the same place, the same trees, the same path. The forest was keeping me here. My phone rang again. I ignored it, but the knock came back, echoing through the RV, louder and louder, until I couldn't take it anymore. I slammed on the brakes, jumping out of the RV, screaming into the trees, "Leave me alone!" The forest answered with silence, and then the whispers returned. Sarah's voice rising on the wind, calling to me, luring me deeper into the trees. I didn't follow. I couldn't. Instead, I grabbed the only thing I had left, my lighter. I built a fire bigger than any I'd made before, the flames roaring into the sky. The knocks stopped. The whispers faded. The forest was quiet again. But I knew, deep down, it wasn't over. I eventually found my way out, back to civilization, but I left the RV behind. I couldn't bring myself to take it with me. I knew what was waiting in those woods. I never went back to the Cherokee National Forest, and every night when the phone rings, I don't answer, because I know it's not her. My legs were sore, and I could feel the sweat drying on my skin, chilling me in the early evening air as I fell down beside the fire we had just managed to coax to life. We were miles away from the main campgrounds, deep in Joshua Tree's endless desert, a decision that had seemed thrilling earlier in the day. But now that the sun was dipping below the horizon, washing the landscape in shades of deep red and purple, I felt a twinge of uncertainty prickling at the back of my neck. It was my idea, of course. I wanted the adventure, the isolation, the strange beauty of the desert at night. The three of us, my boyfriend Alex, my best friend Brianna, and her boyfriend Jared, had all agreed to come out to this spot after some careful convincing on my part. We'd spent the day exploring hidden trails, taking pictures, and climbing the rocky outcroppings that dotted the vast desert. But now, as darkness settled in, I found myself regretting the distance we'd put between ourselves and any other campers. I shifted closer to Alex, trying to ignore my nerves. Brianna sat across from me, her eyes darting nervously at the shadows pooling between the rocks around us. She had never been thrilled about camping so far from civilization, but she'd gone along with it for my sake. Jared, on the other hand, was his usual laid-back self, poking at the fire with a stick. He kept glancing at Brianna and then back at me, his playful grin not quite masking his own unease. "Is this a bad time to mention my tent's busted?" Alex muttered, inspecting a rip along the seam. I groaned. "Seriously? You didn't check before we left?" He shrugged, throwing a lopsided smile my way. "I'm a live-in-the-moment kind of guy. We'll all fit in one tent, right?" "I guess we don't have much choice," Brianna said, shooting me a worried glance. "Let's just hope we all survive the night." Jared laughed a little too loudly. "Come on, Bri. It's not like anything's going to happen out here. It's just us and the desert." But Brianna's eyes hadn't left the encroaching shadows, and I could feel the tightness in her voice. "Yeah, well, that's what they say in every horror movie right before things get bad." The fire crackled as we fell silent, each of us staring into the flames. The familiar rhythm of camping jokes, stories, and laughter was somehow absent tonight. Instead, an uneasy quiet filled the space between us like a cold mist. Even Jared had stopped laughing. He looked up at the darkening sky, his face shadowed in the firelight, and for a moment, I thought he looked genuinely spooky. Just then, I heard it, a faint rhythmic tapping, like something knocking against rock far out in the desert. I glanced at Alex, who was listening too, his brow furrowed. "Probably just the wind," he said, though his voice held a note of doubt. Brianna's eyes darted to mine. "Do you guys hear that?" Jared scoffed, but he didn't sound as confident as usual. "It's just the rocks shifting or animals or something." "Animals that tap?" Brianna asked, her tone sarcastic but edged with genuine fear. Alex put a reassuring arm around me, but I could feel the tension in his grip. "Let's just settle in, okay? It's nothing. I nodded, forcing myself to believe him. Yeah, even though the tapping hadn't stopped. It was steady, too steady, like the beat of a slow drum. Each time it faded into the silence, I could feel a tightness in my chest, an instinctual alarm I couldn't shake. I glanced up at the jagged rocks surrounding our campsite, half expecting to see a figure standing there. But there was nothing, just shadows, deeper and darker than the night itself. Brianna whispered, I heard this story once about this thing that lives out here. They call it the Yucca Man. I forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow. Oh, great, Brianna. Perfect story for a night like this. She looked at me seriously. They say he's like a guardian spirit of the desert, tall with eyes that glow in the dark. Supposedly, he watches over Joshua Tree and doesn't like it when people get too close, especially if they wander off the main trails. Alex rolled his eyes. And he just taps rocks to scare us off? Brianna shrugged, but her voice was barely a whisper. I don't know. Maybe he's just waiting. Waiting for what? Jared scoffed, though his bravado was wearing thin. Before she could answer, Alex stood up and grabbed his flashlight, shining it across the rocks. I watched as the beam illuminated the stark, twisted shapes of the Joshua trees, their shadows stretching and warping across the sand. Just as he moved the light, I saw it, a tall, dark shape standing motionless against the rocks. My heart stopped, and I felt Alex's grip on my hand tighten. Did you see that? He whispered. I nodded, my throat too dry to speak. The figure was gone as quickly as it had appeared, blending back into the darkness. Jared laughed nervously, breaking the tension. It's probably just a shadow, guys. You're all wound up for nothing. But even Jared didn't sound convinced. He picked up his flashlight, swinging it around as if he could somehow erase the eerie image from our minds. The tapping had stopped, leaving a thick, oppressive silence in its place. Brianna's voice was small. Can we just go back? Alex shook his head, even though his face was pale. No way. We came all this way. We're just letting our imaginations get the best of us. But I wasn't so sure. The feeling in the air was different now, like we weren't alone, like there was something ancient and unseen watching us. I looked out into the darkness, straining my eyes for any sign of movement. My gaze landed on a rock nearby, where strange symbols were scratched into the surface, intricate spirals and jagged lines. I hadn't noticed them before. Guys, come look at this, I whispered, beckoning them over. They all gathered around, staring at the markings. Brianna looked unnerved, and even Jared's face was grim. Looks like old petroglyphs, Alex muttered, though his voice lacked confidence. Probably left by Native Americans or something. Brianna shook her head. These aren't like any petroglyphs I've seen. We stared in silence, the weight of the discovery pressing down on us. I could feel something shift in the air, a dark, lurking presence just beyond our understanding. It was like the symbols were meant as a warning, and we were trespassing on something sacred. Then the tapping began again. This time, it was louder, closer. My heart raced as I looked around, the shadows seeming to close in on us. Suddenly, Brianna screamed, pointing to the rocks. The figure was back, closer this time, a tall, thin shadow with eyes that gleamed faintly in the firelight. It watched us, unblinking, its gaze cold and penetrating. Jared stumbled back, his bravado gone. What the hell is that? Alex grabbed my hand, pulling me toward the tent. Get inside now. We all scrambled into the tent, zipping it up in a frenzy. The fire outside flickered, casting an eerie glow on the tent walls, making our shadows dance. I could hear my own breathing, fast and shallow, and tried to quiet it, listening for any sound outside. We sat in silence, huddled together, straining our ears for any sign of movement. For a few moments, there was nothing. Then I heard it, a low whispering voice calling my name. My blood ran cold, and I felt Alex stiffen beside me. Mia. It was my own voice coming from outside the tent. I clutched Alex's arm, trying to keep myself calm, but inside I was shaking. The voice grew louder, then I heard Alex's name, then Brianna's, then Jared's. It was like it knew us, like it was calling us out, one by one. Don't listen to it, Alex whispered, his voice shaking. It's just trying to scare us. But the voice persisted, repeating our names over and over, a haunting chant that made my skin crawl. I could feel the fear thick in the air, an almost tangible weight pressing down on us. Suddenly, the voice stopped, replaced by a scratching sound, like nails dragging against the fabric of the tent. I held my breath, frozen in place, as the scratching moved along the walls, circling slowly. My mind raced, searching for any way out, any escape. Brianna was crying quietly, her head buried in Jared's shoulder, and Jared held her tight, his face pale and drawn. I could feel Alex trembling beside me, his usual confidence replaced by raw fear. Then, just as quickly as it had started, the scratching stopped. Silence fell, thick and suffocating. I felt my heart pounding in my chest, my body tense and ready to bolt. "We need to leave," I whispered. Alex nodded, his face set with determination. "We're going now." We gathered our things as quickly as we could, stumbling out of the tent and into the cold desert night. The fire had died down, leaving only a faint glow to guide us. I looked around, half expecting to see the figure waiting for us, but the desert was empty. We started moving, our steps fast and panicked, our flashlights sweeping over the rocks as we tried to find the trail. Every few steps, I glanced over my shoulder, certain I would see it following us, but there was nothing, only the still, oppressive silence of the desert. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we reached the trailhead, our car waiting just where we'd left it. We piled in, slamming the doors, and Alex started the engine, speeding down the dirt road without looking back. As we drove away, I glanced out the window, and for a brief moment I saw it, the tall, dark figure standing on the edge of the rocks, watching us as we left its territory. Its eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, a silent warning, a promise that we would not be welcome if we ever dared to return. I didn't look back again. None of us spoke the entire way home, but that night, when I closed my eyes, I could still hear it. The rhythmic tapping, the whisper of my name, the feeling of something watching, waiting, lurking just beyond the edge of the light. And I knew that a part of the desert had come back with me, a silent shadow that would haunt me, watching forever. People say the Appalachian forests are haunted. I'd heard the rumors, whispers of restless spirits and strange disappearances, but I'd never given them much thought. After years of debunking ghost stories as a journalist, I became the kind of person who trusted facts, not folklore. Still, I couldn't resist the pull of Pisgah National Forest. It was remote, beautiful, and full of forgotten places that no one cared to visit anymore. Perfect for the series I'd been working on for my blog, Ghost Towns of the Forgotten South. This was my passion now, traveling, exploring the lost corners of America, and turning those empty spaces into stories. This time, I was after an old settlement deep in the forest, one that most people in town wouldn't even talk about. There were no records of why it had been abandoned, just strange rumors of sickness and disappearances. But those stories were always embellished over time. People loved their spooky tales, and it was my job to sift the truth from the legend. I parked my RV at a secluded spot near the trailhead, not far from the ghost town, or what remained of it. I planned to spend a couple of nights out here, explore, take some pictures, and maybe talk to a few locals who might know more about its history. The air was crisp and cool as I stepped outside. The towering trees cast long shadows, making it feel later than it was. As I set up camp, I noticed how unnaturally quiet the forest was. No birds, no rustling leaves, just silence. I brushed it off. Deep forests always had a strange stillness about them. I'd been in enough of them to know that the real danger was tripping over a root, not some ghostly figure hiding behind the trees. That first night, I woke to a distant sound, like laughter. It was faint, barely a whisper on the wind. I sat up in my sleeping bag, listening. Could there be other campers out here? I doubted it. This part of the forest wasn't exactly a tourist hotspot. My phone was dead, but I'd recorded some video earlier in the day. I grabbed my camera and replayed the footage. There it was, faint, like a breeze blowing through, but unmistakable, children's laughter. I pushed it out of my mind and went back to sleep. I had a lot of ground to cover tomorrow, and the last thing I needed was to let my imagination run wild. The next day, I set out to find the old settlement. It was slow going. Thick overgrowth and fading trails made navigation difficult. The map I had was basic, nothing more than a dotted line leading me deeper into the woods. The farther I went, the heavier the air felt, like the forest was closing in around me. But I kept going, determined to find this place. After about an hour, I noticed carvings, symbols strange and jagged, etched into the bark of the trees. They weren't any kind of writing I recognized, but they gave me an uneasy feeling. Maybe it was some old superstition, a way to ward off bad spirits. I took a few photos and kept moving. It was another hour before I finally found it. The ghost town was just as eerie as I'd imagined. Small, dilapidated cabins stood in clusters, some half collapsed under the weight of time and nature. Weeds and vines crept over everything, reclaiming the land. I walked through the empty streets, my camera clicking as I captured the desolation, the eerie stillness. That's when I saw the cemetery, small, tucked away behind what must have been the church, though the building itself was nothing more than a few rotting beams. The graves were old, the names barely legible, but the dates caught my eye. Some of them were from decades ago, but others were from the future. My first instinct was that it had to be a mistake, some kind of misprint or vandalism. But the stones looked too old, too weathered to be recent. A chill ran down my spine as I stepped back from the graves. It didn't make sense, and I didn't like the feeling gnawing at the back of my mind. The forest was quiet again, too quiet. I realized then that I hadn't heard anything. Not birds, not insects. Nothing since I'd arrived. I packed up my camera and headed back toward my RV. I'd gotten what I came for and figured I'd do some research on the strange gravestones when I got back to town. But something was wrong. The trail didn't look right. I was sure I'd come from this direction, but now the trees seemed different. The symbols I'd passed earlier weren't there anymore, and the forest seemed denser, more oppressive. My pulse quickened. I was lost. That was impossible. I never got lost, not with GPS and maps, not with all the preparation I'd done. I kept walking, trying to retrace my steps, but the more I walked, the more disoriented I became. Every turn led me to unfamiliar territory, and soon the forest looked completely foreign. My sense of time slipped away and the sky started to darken, even though it felt like midday. Then I saw it, just ahead, through the trees. A figure stood on the trail, tall and motionless, watching me. I stopped cold, my heart hammering in my chest. "Hello?" I called, my voice sounding smaller than I'd intended. No response. The figure didn't move. I took a step closer, squinting through the gloom, but as I did, it vanished. Just gone. I spun around, scanning the trees, but there was no sign of anyone. My hands shook as I adjusted my pack. This was wrong. Everything was wrong. The sun had nearly set by the time I found my RV. It was parked where I left it, but somehow the journey back had taken hours longer than it should have. My legs were aching, my mind spinning with confusion. I climbed inside, locking the door behind me and collapsing onto the bed. That's when the laughter started again. Louder this time, right outside the RV. I shot up, my heart pounding. I could hear them, children laughing and running around, their voices bouncing off the trees. I grabbed the camera, pointing it toward the window. But the moment I did, the laughter stopped. The forest was silent again, suffocating in its stillness. I played back the footage on the camera, hoping to catch something, anything that would explain what was happening. But instead, I heard something else. A voice, clear as day, whispering my name. "Alex," I froze. The camera dropped from my hands and hit the floor with a thud, the sound echoing in the empty RV. Something was out there, and it knew my name. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the bed, every muscle tense, listening to the silence, waiting for something to happen. I thought about leaving, driving out of the forest and abandoning the project altogether, but the RV wouldn't start. I tried the engine a dozen times, but it was dead as if the battery had drained overnight. My phone was useless, still dead from the day before. I was completely cut off. The next morning, I decided I had to do something. I couldn't stay here, not with whatever was out there watching me. I remembered the symbols on the trees, the strange carvings I'd seen on my hike. They had to mean something. Maybe they were the key to getting out of here. I grabbed my camping knife and headed back into the woods. The air was heavy, thick with a sense of dread. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to keep walking. I found the first symbol carved into the bark of a tree just off the trail. With a deep breath, I drove the blade into the wood, carving through the lines. As soon as the symbol was broken, the air shifted. The forest seemed to shudder, and for a moment I thought I heard a scream, a distant echo and wail carried on the wind. I stumbled back, my heart racing, but I kept going. I found the next tree and did the same, cutting through the strange lines with my knife. The voices grew louder, The laughter, the whispers, all swirling around me like a storm. I could see the figures now, darting between the trees, shadowy, faceless figures watching, waiting. They wanted me to stop. They didn't want me to leave. But I wasn't going to be trapped here, not like them. I reached the final tree, my hands trembling as I raised the knife. The voices were deafening now, the figures closing in, but I didn't stop. With one last slash, I broke the symbol, and just like that, the voices stopped. The forest went still, the shadows vanished, and the oppressive weight that had hung over me lifted. I stumbled back toward my RV, half expecting the figures to reappear, but the woods were empty. When I got back, the engine started on the first try. I didn't look back as I drove out of the forest, my hands gripping the steering wheel tight enough to turn my knuckles wide. I wasn't going to write about this place. I wasn't going to tell anyone what happened here. Some things are better left forgotten. If you'd told me a week ago that I'd be clutching my best friend's arm, hiding from a shadow creature in the Utah desert, I'd have laughed. That's the sort of stuff reserved for ghost stories told around the campfire, right? But now, as I crouch low in the sand, staring at the shadow shifting through the rocks like smoke, the chill in my spine tells me I was wrong. Tyler and I had been planning this trip for ages. It was supposed to be a break from our relentless lives back in San Francisco. When my promotion came through, I convinced him we had to celebrate by camping across the Southwest, ticking off bucket list spots along the way. Dead Horse Point was the prize, the place I'd looked forward to the most. Its isolation, haunting beauty, and honestly, its reputation for eerie legends that I couldn't resist. We pulled in late, just as the sun was setting over the canyon, casting a blood-red glow across the twisted rock formations. I remember that unease settled over me then, the kind that sends a tiny shiver from the back of your neck, all the way down. Tyler, ever the skeptic, brushed it off as I pointed out that we were alone in this remote part of the park. Great. More room for us, he joked, snapping photos of the stunning desert horizon. It took us a bit longer to find a spot than we'd planned. Our GPS was acting weird, leading us down dirt trails that seemed to spiral into nowhere. Eventually, Tyler managed to maneuver our RV into a flat area. Not ideal, but secluded and scenic. Perfect, he said. I wasn't so sure. When we finally set up camp, the daylight had faded, leaving us bathed in the cold blue of twilight. I fiddled with our old portable radio, hoping to get some music to fill the silence, but the thing just crackled with static before sputtering and dying altogether. Tyler laughed, but I caught the way his eyes darted around the empty landscape. It felt almost oppressive, the way the land seemed to watch us. You and that ghost-loving imagination, Tyler teased, rummaging through his bag. Maybe it's a sign, or just Utah's finest weather. Ha! Very funny, I replied, forcing a laugh. But this place has stories, Ty. Have you heard of the Skinwalker? The what? He chuckled, turning to face me. Mia, are you seriously bringing up ghost stories? Not ghosts, exactly, I said, trying to hide how uneasy I felt. Skinwalkers are shapeshifters in Navajo legends. They can mimic people, even voices, to lure you away. People say they're evil spirits in human or animal form. Tyler looked at me with that familiar, infuriating smirk. Oh yeah, then let's summon one here. Skinwalker, Skinwalker, show yourself. I hissed for him to stop, but he just laughed and returned to the viewfinder on his camera, snapping photos of the canyon now fully cloaked in darkness. I closed the RV door, hoping to shut out the chill that had suddenly settled into my bones, but that shiver, that sense of being watched, it lingered. It was maybe an hour later when the first sound came. A light shuffling sound outside, like footsteps in the gravel. My heart skipped, and I shot Tyler a look, but he was already putting on a brave face, pulling his boots on to investigate. It's probably an animal, he whispered, winking. Mountain lions, right? Yeah, because mountain lions sound like people, I said, my voice barely a breath. He ignored me, clicking on his flashlight and stepping out. It was quiet, eerily so. Tyler scanned the flashlight across the rocks. The beam cast long shadows. For a moment, I was almost convinced he was right, that we were just being paranoid in the silence of the desert. But then we heard it. A whisper. It was faint but unmistakable. Mia, Mia. My breath caught in my throat. The voice was scratchy and low, calling my name. I whipped around to face Tyler, but he was frozen, his face drained of color as the voice echoed again. "Did you?" I stammered, trying to find the words. Tyler didn't answer. He just stared, flashlight clutched so tightly his knuckles were white. "Mia, Mia." This time, the voice seemed closer, as if it were slipping between the rocks, winding its way through the desert toward us. It sounded familiar too familiar but wrong. "Let's go inside," I whispered. Tyler nodded and we backed up slowly, not turning our backs on the emptiness around us. Once inside, I locked the door. Our breaths were rapid in the tight space. Tyler finally spoke, his voice shaking. "Tell me that was just the wind." "I don't think so," I replied, glancing out the window. The night was still, an unnatural stillness that seemed to hold its breath. Just as I was starting to feel a little less tense, there was a sharp knock on the side of the RV. We both froze. Another knock, then another, rhythmic, echoing through the metal walls. Tyler's face paled and I could feel my heartbeat hammering in my throat. "Who's there?" he called, his voice wavering. The only answer was a slow scrape against the door, a sound that made my skin crawl. I squeezed Tyler's arm. "Don't open it." "What if someone's hurt?" he whispered back, already inching toward the door. But I couldn't shake the feeling that opening that door would be the worst thing we could do. "Just wait." Then, to our horror, we heard it. Tyler's voice calling from outside. "Tyler, help! Come out here." Tyler looked at me, eyes wide with terror. "What?" he stammered. The voice repeated, distorted, stretching his name into a twisted mockery. "Tyler? Tyler." I grabbed his hand, squeezing hard. "Don't answer. Whatever you do, don't answer it." The minutes dragged by, each second stretching into eternity, as the voice continued calling, beckoning us. Tyler and I stayed as still as statues, clutching each other. The silence in the RV was thick and heavy. Finally, the knocking stopped, and for a moment, all was quiet. But just when I started to breathe again, the RV rocked violently as though something massive had slammed into it. Tyler scrambled to the driver's seat, twisting the keys to start the engine, but it sputtered and died. He tried again and again, but nothing. The shape outside pressed itself against the window, casting an elongated, inhuman shadow. It had limbs too long, eyes that glowed with a sickly yellow light. Its mouth was twisted into an eerie mimicry of a smile that seemed to stretch too far. "Oh my God," Tyler gasped, clutching the steering wheel, white-knuckled. "Mia," the creature hissed, its voice a blend of my own and Tyler's, distorted, mocking. "Come outside." I shook my head, my voice trembling. "Don't look at it. Don't listen to it." But it was too late. Tyler couldn't tear his gaze away from that awful face in the window. His breath hitched as the creature's mouth stretched impossibly wide. Suddenly he screamed, clutching his ears as if to block out the sound. I pulled him away, whispering words I barely remembered from some article on Navajo blessings, words I didn't even know if I was pronouncing right. But as I spoke, the creature seemed to pause, tilting its head in confusion, almost weakened. Seizing my chance, I dragged Tyler out of his stupor, and together we stumbled out of the RV. The creature's eyes followed us, glowing like embers, as we bolted toward a narrow crevice in the rocks. I held Tyler tight as we crouched in the shadows, watching the thing stalk around our RV, frustrated, snarling. It hissed again, a guttural sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Mia, you can't hide." Tyler's hand was clammy in mine, his breath shallow. "Mia, what is that thing?" "A skinwalker," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "It's feeding off our fear." Tyler squeezed my hand tighter. "What do we do?" "We stay quiet and don't look it in the eyes," I murmured, remembering the warning. "We wait." Time seemed to slow. The skinwalker circled the rocks, searching, stalking, its low growl echoing off the stone. At one point it stopped, sniffing the air, then its gaze passing right over us, so close I could see the rotting skin around its eyes. We held our breaths, not daring to move. Slowly, the creature slunk away, disappearing into the shadows. The silence stretched on, each second a lifetime. Eventually, we crept back to the RV, praying the creature had gone. Tyler tried the engine again, and miraculously, it roared to life. Without a second thought, we sped down the road, the headlights cutting through the darkness as we left Dead Horse Point behind. By morning, we were back in Moab, dazed, exhausted, and shaken beyond belief. Tyler's arm was bleeding from where the creature had scratched him, and I had bruises from gripping him too tightly. We warned other campers, but no one believed us. Later, as I lay awake in the safety of a crowded campsite, I could still hear it, whispering my name on the wind, lingering in the corners of my mind. Maybe it was waiting, or maybe it was just saying goodbye. Until next time. I've always believed that everything has an explanation. Ghost stories, strange occurrences, they're all just misinterpretations of reality. That's what I told myself as I drove my RV deep into the desert, chasing the Marfa lights, one of those unexplained phenomena that people love to whisper about. I was determined to demystify them, capture them on camera, and show the world that there was nothing supernatural about it. The desert stretched out before me, flat and endless, the sky a deep, cloudless blue. I'd parked my RV on the outskirts of Marfa, Texas, far enough from the town to avoid any distractions. The lights were supposed to appear at night, floating out there in the desert like glowing orbs. People called them spirits or even UFOs, but I knew better. I was here to photograph them, document them, and move on. That first night was quiet, too quiet. I set up my camera gear just outside the RV, tripods locked in place, lenses ready for long exposure shots. The desert was unnervingly still, the kind of silence that makes you feel like you've been buried under a blanket. No wind, no animals, not even the hum of distant cars. I told myself it was just the isolation playing tricks on me. I'd been alone in the wild before. This was nothing new. Hours passed, and just as I was about to give up and call it a night, the lights appeared. At first, they were faint, barely noticeable, small glowing orbs that hovered just above the horizon. I leaned forward in my chair, eyes fixed on them. They weren't anything special, just some kind of atmospheric phenomenon, I thought. But then they moved slowly, almost deliberately. They floated closer, their soft glow reflecting off the desert sand. I snapped photo after photo, my fingers flying over the camera buttons. This was exactly what I'd come for. Clear, undeniable evidence. No one could call this supernatural nonsense once I had the data. But the lights were behaving differently than I expected. They weren't just floating randomly, they were almost watching me. I stood up, staring at the lights as they hovered, flickering softly, maybe 50 yards away. Then, suddenly, they darted closer. My heart skipped a beat as I stepped back instinctively. The lights pulsed, brightening for a moment before retreating, as if they were playing with me. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my nerves. Just lights, just gases or atmospheric anomalies, nothing to be afraid of. But the way they moved, it was like they were alive. I shook my head, frustrated. "Focus, Greg, it's all explainable," I muttered to myself. I turned back to my camera gear, checking the shots I'd taken. That's when the first problem started. The images were completely corrupted. Every shot I'd taken of the lights was ruined, nothing but distorted lines and static revive, like an old TV losing signal. I flipped through the photos in disbelief. The lights had been right there, clear as day, but my camera had failed to capture a single usable image. My stomach churned. That wasn't right. I'd tested all the equipment before I left. I'd checked the camera, adjusted the settings, but the battery was draining fast, too fast. The indicator flashed red, and within seconds, the camera died in my hands. "Damn it!" I hissed, grabbing my backup battery, but it was no use. Everything, camera, spare batteries, even my phone, was losing power faster than it should. It was like something was draining the life out of my equipment. Frustrated, I packed up my gear and headed back into the RV, locking the door behind me. I tried not to think about the lights still hovering outside, flickering just beyond the window. It had to be a glitch, I told myself. I'd deal with it in the morning. But I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, the silence pressing in around me. Every so often I'd glance at the window, expecting to see the lights hovering there. I didn't want to admit it, but something about them unnerved me. The following day, I tried to shake off the unease. I spent hours checking my gear, trying to figure out what had gone wrong, but everything looked fine. The equipment was fully functional again, as if nothing had happened. It was strange, but I wasn't about to let one weird night stop me. I'd try again tonight, capture the lights properly this time. As evening fell, I set up my gear again, determined to make up for last night. The desert was still, the sky a dull orange as the sun dipped below the horizon. I watched, waiting for the lights to appear, and they did. But this time they were closer. They floated just above the sand, pulsing softly, glowing brighter than before. My breath caught in my throat as I watched them move. Their rhythm was almost hypnotic, but it wasn't just their movement that startled me. It was the fact that they seemed to be getting nearer. I reached for my camera, ready to capture them again, but the battery was dead. Again, I checked my phone. Dead. Panic flickered at the edge of my mind. This wasn't possible. The lights were now just 30 feet away, their glow casting long shadows on the ground. They pulsed, brighter, flickering in strange, almost deliberate patterns. I couldn't explain it, but it felt like they were trying to communicate. Then I heard it, a whisper. It was faint at first, barely audible, like the wind brushing past my ear. I froze, straining to hear. The whisper came again, but this time it was clearer. Greg. My blood ran cold. I whipped around, searching for the source of the voice, but there was no one, just the empty desert. The whisper came again, closer this time. Greg. I backed toward the RV, my pulse racing. This wasn't right. This wasn't explainable. The lights were hovering just a few feet away now, and the whispers, they were inside my head. I scrambled into the RV, slamming the door shut behind me, my heart hammering in my chest. The lights were outside the window, flickering. The whispering continued, filling the small space with eerie, disembodied voices. I tried to start the engine, but it sputtered and died. No power, no escape. The lights pressed closer, their glow filling the RV, casting strange shadows on the walls. I felt them, those whispers, crawling into my mind, telling me to come outside, to follow them into the desert. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I wasn't going to let this beat me. I wasn't going to give in to fear. But then the lights began to move. They circled the RV faster and faster, like they were closing in on me. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. Follow the lights. I felt a tug, a pull in my chest, as if the lights were calling me, drawing me out of the RV. I fought against it, but it was getting harder to resist. The lights flickered faster, the whispers filling my head until I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. With a surge of adrenaline, I grabbed my jacket and kicked the door open, running into the desert. The lights followed, darting around me, leading me deeper into the night. I stumbled through the sand, my heart pounding. The whispers guided me further from the RV, but something inside me snapped. I stopped running, gasping for air, and turned to face the lights. I wasn't going to follow them. I wasn't going to disappear like so many before me. No! I shouted, my voice trembling. I won't go. The lights pulsed, flickering faster. The whispers screamed in my head, but I stood my ground, forcing myself to ignore them. Slowly, the lights began to fade. The whispers grew softer until they were nothing more than faint echoes in the wind. I stumbled back to the RV, exhausted, my mind spinning. The lights were gone, retreating into the desert, but I knew they'd be back. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. By morning, I packed up and left Marfa. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away from the desert, far from the lights. I never told anyone what happened. No one would believe me anyway. But I'll never forget those lights, the way they moved, the way they whispered my name. I came here to prove they were just a natural phenomenon, just an unexplained mystery of the desert. But now I know better. Some things aren't meant to be explained, and some lights should never be followed. When we first arrived at Shenandoah National Park, I remember thinking how peaceful it all was. The towering trees, the vast open skies, and the faint sound of birds singing in the distance. This was exactly the kind of break we all needed. I'm Alex, the planner of the group, and I'd organized this camping trip to get away from the stress of city life. Mark, my boyfriend, sat in the passenger seat beside me, relaxed and smiling as we made our way along the winding mountain road. Behind us in the RV were Jessica and Eric, my two closest friends. They weren't exactly the outdoorsy type, but they'd agreed to come along, maybe out of some sense of duty to reconnect. Eric was already cracking jokes about how bad he'd be at camping, while Jessica half laughed nervously, fiddling with her phone. I remember feeling so confident, so prepared. I'd planned everything, except, of course, for the things no one could plan for. We parked the RV at a small, secluded site off the Appalachian Trail, far from the more populated areas. That was the whole point: isolation, serenity, nature at its purest. The weather was supposed to be clear all weekend, perfect for hiking and camping. As we started setting up camp, the first signs of trouble were small. Jessica complained about her shoes. "These hiking boots are killing me. Why did I even buy them?" she groaned. "They're probably just stiff," I said, brushing her off. I was already focused on getting the tent up, but that's when I noticed Mark shaking his head. "The tent's missing poles," he said, laughing a little. "We'll have to use the RV for tonight." "Fine," I replied, hiding my frustration. "Minor setbacks, nothing more." The real trouble began as dusk fell. It was subtle at first. As we sat around the small campfire Mark had built, the woods around us seemed to grow quieter. The bird song, once a pleasant background, faded into nothing. No wind stirred the leaves, and even the occasional sound of wildlife disappeared. I chalked it up to the natural rhythms of the forest, nocturnal creatures and all that, but then I noticed the smell. At first it was faint, a whiff of something rotten, like spoiled meat. I thought maybe it was something in the air, or that something had died nearby. I didn't mention it, not wanting to freak anyone out. Eric, of course, was oblivious to the shift in mood. He was still joking around, telling some story about a horror movie he'd seen last week. "This place reminds me of one of those settings," he said, grinning as he poked at the fire. "A group of friends in the middle of nowhere, and then bam! Haunted by some spirit or creature." "Shut up," Jessica muttered, hugging her knees. "This place is creepy enough already." I rolled my eyes at them both, but Mark shifted uneasily beside me, glancing out into the darkening woods. I was about to ask him what was wrong when he stood up suddenly. "Did you hear that?" he asked. "Hear what?" I said, feeling a flicker of irritation. We'd barely been here a few hours and they were already on edge. "I swear I heard something," he said, his voice tense like footsteps, heavy, coming from the woods. Eric laughed, but it was strained. "It's probably a bear or something. Or maybe Bigfoot." Jessica looked pale, her eyes darting to the dark forest around us. "This isn't funny, guys." "It's nothing," I said firmly. "Just the woods settling down for the night. Let's not spook ourselves over nothing." But as the evening wore on, that smell of rot kept coming back, and so did the uneasy silence. Even the crackle of the fire felt muted. The next day was supposed to be better. We set out on the trail, hoping to shake off the weirdness of the night before. The weather was colder than expected, with a thick mist hanging low in the valley, making everything damp. Jessica slipped a few times on the muddy path, cursing under her breath. "This fog is so creepy," she muttered. Mark tried to lighten the mood. "It'll clear up once the sun's out. Let's just enjoy the hike." But I could tell he was uneasy too. None of us had slept well. Every time I drifted off, I thought I heard something moving outside the RV. Maybe it was my imagination, but something kept waking me up, like a low rustling or breathing. Halfway through the hike, we reached a lookout point. The fog had lifted just enough for us to see the rolling hills stretching out below us. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. Then I saw Mark, standing at the edge of the trees, staring into the distance. "Mark?" I called. He didn't answer. I walked over to him, a knot forming in my stomach. "What's wrong?" He pointed, his face pale. "Do you see that?" I squinted, looking where he was pointing. At first, I saw nothing but trees. But then something moved. A figure, tall and gaunt, barely visible through the mist. It stood completely still, as though it had been there the entire time, watching. "It's just a hiker," I said, though my voice sounded less confident than I'd hoped. "That's no hiker," Mark whispered. "Look at it." The figure stood too tall, its limbs too thin, and its skin seemed pale, almost translucent. But before I could get a better look, it was gone, melted into the fog. By the time we got back to the RV, the mood had soured. Mark was withdrawn, barely speaking, and Jessica kept glancing over her shoulder as though she expected something to jump out at us. The smell returned as we gathered around the campfire again that night. This time it was stronger, more pungent, like decaying meat left out in the sun. Eric wrinkled his nose. "Okay, seriously, what is that?" "It's the woods," I said, though even I didn't believe it anymore. The silence pressed down on us like a weight, and then, from deep in the trees, we heard it. A voice, soft, distant, but unmistakably human. "Help me." We all froze. "What the hell?" Eric whispered, his eyes wide. The voice came again, a little closer. "Help! Help me!" "It's someone in trouble," Mark said, standing up. "We need to go check." "No," I said, grabbing his arm. "We don't. That doesn't sound right." The voice was too calm, too controlled. There was no panic in it, no urgency. It sounded wrong, like it was echoing in the wrong direction. Jessica was shaking now, her face pale. We have to leave. I don't like this. For once, Eric wasn't joking. Yeah, maybe we should call it quits. But Mark was already moving toward the trees. Mark, stop, I hissed, following him. This is crazy. He didn't stop. He kept walking toward the voice, his expression blank, as if he were in a trance. I reached out, grabbing him and pulling him back, just as a figure emerged from the fog, the same gaunt figure we'd seen earlier. It stood at the edge of the clearing, impossibly tall, its limbs too long, its eyes hollow black pits. My blood turned to ice. What is that? Jessica whispered, her voice trembling. The figure took a step forward, its body moving in a jerky, unnatural way, like it didn't know how to walk properly. Then, with a sickening crack, it twisted its head to the side, staring at us with those empty, soulless eyes. Mark stumbled back, snapping out of whatever trance had held him. We need to go now. The four of us rushed to the RV, slamming the door shut behind us. Outside, the figure circled the clearing, watching us, waiting. The next few hours were a blur of panic. We tried to start the RV, but the engine sputtered and died. The flashlight batteries drained within minutes. Every time we looked outside, the figure was there, standing at the edge of the trees, just watching. We're trapped, Eric muttered, pacing the small space of the RV. What the hell is that thing? It's not real, I said, though even I wasn't sure anymore. It can't be. But it was, and it wasn't going anywhere. Mark sat in the corner, his head in his hands. It's the Wendigo, he whispered, his voice barely audible. What? I asked, staring at him. The Wendigo, he repeated. It's an old Native American legend, a spirit of insatiable hunger. It drives people mad, makes them turn on each other. That's ridiculous, I said, but my voice shook. I've heard of it, Eric said, his face pale. It feeds on fear and hunger. A cold realization washed over me, the constant hunger we'd all been feeling, the strange cravings, the paranoia. Everything had started the moment we'd arrived. It's trying to drive us mad, Mark said, his eyes wild. That's why it hasn't attacked. It wants us to destroy each other. By the time night fell, the Wendigo was closer, standing just outside the RV, its gaunt, twisted face pressed against the window, its fingers tapping softly on the glass. Jessica couldn't take it anymore. I have to get out of here, she screamed, bolting for the door. Wait, I shouted, but it was too late. She was already outside, running into the woods. We rushed after her, but the fog swallowed her whole. I could hear her screaming, her voice echoing through the trees. And then, silence. We found her body a few minutes later. Her limbs were twisted, her face frozen in a mask of terror. The Wendigo stood over her, watching, its empty eyes locked on us. We need to leave, Mark said, his voice shaking now. We stumbled back to the RV, but as we slammed the door shut, I saw the look in Mark's eyes. The hunger had taken hold of him. He was muttering to himself, his eyes darting toward me, then Eric. He's not right, Eric whispered. It's inside him. Mark lunged at me, his hands grasping at my throat. I'm sorry, he said, his voice cracking. I can't stop it. I struggled, pushing him off, and he collapsed to the floor, sobbing. Eric grabbed a metal pipe and stood over him, ready to strike if he tried again. We have to get out of here, I said, my voice barely a whisper. The Wendigo was still outside, waiting. As we approached, the fog began to lift. We packed what little we could carry and made a run for it, leaving the RV behind. The Wendigo didn't follow, it just watched, its hollow eyes locked onto us as we disappeared down the trail. Even now I can still feel its gaze, like it's always there, just beyond the edge of my vision. Watching, waiting. I'll never go back to the wilderness again. Not after what I've seen. Not after what we've done. I should have known better than to trust an unmarked road. After years of travel writing, you'd think I'd have a sharper instinct for bad decisions, but there I was, driving deeper into Gifford Pinchot National Forest, chasing a forgotten trail that was supposed to lead me to a ghost town no one could find anymore. Vanished off the map. The ranger at the visitor center had said with a grin, "People go looking for it and never see it again. It's like the road just swallows you up." He laughed, but I could see the glint in his eye. He loved spinning those kinds of tales for tourists, but I wasn't a tourist. I was a writer, damn it. I had an assignment to finish, and there was no room for ghost stories. I followed the narrow, crumbling logging road as it wound deeper into the trees. My RV rattled along, tires crunching over fallen branches and loose gravel. The road narrowed, barely wide enough for my rig, but I kept going. I'd done my research, and this was the right way, even if the forest seemed determined to reclaim the path. It had been a long day, and I was eager to set up camp and relax before exploring the area the next morning. The further I went, the thicker the trees grew, their branches knitting together overhead, blotting out the late afternoon sun. My GPS had long since lost signal, but I didn't need it. I was prepared. I had maps. I was confident I didn't get lost easily. But as I rounded the last bend in the road, something changed. The sky had been clear earlier, but a dense fog was rolling in now, thick and fast. I could barely see 10 feet in front of me. The road, which had been clear just moments ago, seemed to dissolve into a gray blur. I slowed to a crawl, squinting through the windshield. Just up ahead, a small clearing appeared through the mist. It wasn't much, but it was enough room for me to park the RV. I didn't have many other options. I pulled in, killed the engine, and stepped outside. The fog clung to everything, making the air feel damp and cold. It shouldn't have been this cold, not in early fall. The chill crept into my bones, but I pushed it aside and started setting up camp. Something about the silence gnawed at me, though. No wind, no birds, no rustling leaves, just stillness in that damned fog. I finished my setup quickly, then retreated to the warmth of the RV. I wasn't nervous, but the quiet was getting under my skin. I grabbed a beer from the fridge, settled into the driver's seat, and pulled out my maps. I spread them across the dash, looking for my next move. The ghost town was supposed to be less than a mile away, hidden deep in the woods, down a trail that was barely marked. Tomorrow, I'd hike to it, get my pictures, take some notes, and be done with it. Easy. But something was off. The road I'd driven on wasn't showing up on the map anymore. I traced the route with my finger, confused. The road was here. I'd just come down it, but now on the map, it wasn't anywhere to be found. I leaned back in my seat, staring out the windshield at the fog-shrouded forest. The ranger's words echoed in my mind. Vanished off the map. I laughed softly to myself. It was a joke, a tall tale to scare off amateur hikers. Nothing more. Still, when I stepped outside to stretch my legs, I felt it again. That unsettling stillness. The fog was thicker now, curling around the RV like tendrils. I looked back toward the road I'd driven in on, but it wasn't there. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and stepped forward, peering into the mist. No road, just an unbroken line of trees. My stomach tightened. I walked a few more steps, hoping the road would reappear, but it didn't. The forest was dense, the trees close together. There was no sign of the path I had taken just hours earlier. It was as if it had been swallowed whole. I jogged back to the RV, heart racing now. I grabbed my flashlight and marched back to where the road should have been, sweeping the beam through the fog, but all I could see were trees, tall, dark, and oppressive. My breath fogged the air in front of me as I stood there, trying to make sense of it. The road couldn't just vanish. I hadn't gotten lost. I couldn't have. But when I turned back toward the RV, I felt it. That creeping sensation that I wasn't alone. I swung the flashlight around, heart pounding, and for a split second, I thought I saw movement in the fog. A figure, tall and thin, slipping between the trees. Hello? My voice cracked. I regretted speaking as soon as the word left my mouth. The fog swallowed my voice, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. I scanned the tree line again. Nothing. I backed toward the RV, my nerves on edge, and hurried inside, locking the door behind me. I wasn't about to let a little fog and a missing road freak me out, but something felt wrong. The rational part of my brain was trying to make sense of it. Fog could play tricks on your eyes, and maybe I'd missed a turn somewhere. That was all. But deep down, I wasn't convinced. I spent the next hour pacing the length of the RV, checking and rechecking my maps, trying to retrace my route in my head. Nothing made sense. The road had been there. I hadn't imagined it. By nightfall, the fog had thickened to the point where I couldn't see more than a few feet outside. The temperature had dropped even more, and I cranked up the RV's heater, wrapping myself in blankets. Sleep didn't come easily. I kept hearing things, soft thuds like footsteps outside, and whispers that seemed to drift through the walls. It had to be the fog, I told myself. It was distorting sound, making me paranoid. But when I woke in the middle of the night, there were voices. I sat up in bed, my breath catching in my throat. I could hear them, faint, murmuring voices coming from outside. I crawled to the front of the RV, heart hammering, and peered through the windshield. The figures were back. This time, there were more of them. Shadows in the fog, standing still, watching. They were too far away to make out any details, but I could feel their eyes on me. Cold, hollow eyes. I blinked, and they were gone. I scrambled to turn on the engine, but it sputtered and died. No power. The RV was silent, cold, and dark. I grabbed my flashlight and flicked it on, but the beam barely cut through the fog. I tried to stay calm, tried to think logically, but my heart was racing, my mind spiraling into panic. The road was gone, the figures were back, and now I was trapped here. I had to get out. I grabbed my jacket and burst out of the RV. The cold hit me like a slab. I marched toward where the road had been, determined to find it, but the forest had shifted. The trees were closer now, the fog denser. I walked for what felt like hours, but the landscape stayed the same. It was as if I was walking in circles. No matter which way I turned, I kept ending up back at the RV. I could hear the voices again, closer now. They echoed through the fog, indistinct and ghostly. My flashlight flickered, and the shadows appeared again. Closer this time, standing just beyond the beam of light. I ran back to the RV, slamming the door behind me, my chest heaving. The figures were out there, circling me, waiting. I don't know how long I sat there, clutching the flashlight, waiting for something to happen. The fog pressed against the windows, and the shadows loomed outside, never coming closer but never leaving. Morning came, though I could barely tell. The fog hadn't lifted, and the road was still gone. I tried the engine again, and this time it roared to life. Relief washed over me, but it was fleeting. I turned the RV around, driving slowly back the way I'd come. If the road was there, I couldn't see it. All I could do was follow the same path I'd taken before, hoping it would lead me out. But it didn't. The road stretched out endlessly in front of me, a straight line through the fog, leading nowhere. And as I drove, I realized with sinking dread that I was still trapped. The road hadn't taken me anywhere. I was driving in circles, and the figures were still there, watching, waiting. They had me now. The vanishing road wasn't just a story. It was real, and I wasn't getting out.